Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and today is going to be a bit of a different pace from usual because today I'm talking about how fiber arts both help and potentially hinder emotional well-being. So I'm going to start with a few caveats because I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. I'm not a doctor of any kind. I have my MBA in marketing, so this is not my area of expertise. And this video is for entertainment and educational purposes. It is not to diagnose or anything. So take from this video what helps you, leave what doesn't help you, and please be kind and polite in the comments. This is also by no means complete information, so if you have more information, please leave it down in the comments. And if you feel comfortable telling your mental health story, I know many people would probably appreciate that. Only if you're comfortable, please feel free to share in the comments. And also please make sure that all comments are respectful, polite, and encouraging. We don't need any bullshit in the comments because this is a very touchy, tender subject, and what works for one person may not work for another. So I think this is an area that requires compassion. And I will be telling my mental health story at the end, so I could definitely use kindness when it comes to that as well. The other disclaimer is that I want to make sure to state from the beginning that fiber arts do not make or break mental health. And that's the main point of this video. Fiber arts are a tool in a toolbox that can be used to help mental health. And sometimes our other mental health issues show up in our crafting. So being aware can help with other mental health issues. So I want to be clear that stitching is not the make it or break it thing for mental health. And just to keep that perspective through this video. Though I think I'm going to be clear about it, but I just want to be extra clear because this is an area that a lot of people see through their own tinted glasses, so to speak. Just be aware, don't put words in my mouth. But there are a lot of good mental health things that happen with fiber arts. So let's go through the good, and then we'll go through some of the not so good. So the first and foremost good thing is that fiber arts, whatever they are, and honestly any type of crafting, is meditative. Meditation can be found in anything that is repetitive, not just sitting there and trying to clear your mind, which actually does not work for the vast majority of people, in my opinion. At least it doesn't work for me. It doesn't seem to work with a lot of kinesthetic learners either. People who experience the world through their body, not just through visual and auditory perceptions. Anything can be meditative, going for walks, exercising, knitting, crochet, cross stitch, embroidery, quilting, sewing, pouring candles, making soap, all of these things, woodworking, all of these things have a meditative quality because they are repetitive. You get into this kind of zone when you're making that allows you to think through and process your thoughts, emotions, and things that happen that day. For example, about a month ago, I got yelled at. The part of it that was my fault was I could have phrased my thoughts better. I'm a snappy person. I don't always gentle my tone. And when you're texting, tone doesn't come across properly. But she totally overreacted because she was overstressed. And I was just the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, and she vented all of her frustrations at me, and then her frustrations about me got vented to my husband and my husband's grandmother, and it just became this whole entire bullshit situation. And basically over the next week, I've been super into cross stitch and knitting lately, so through working on my projects, I managed to process my emotions and think them through and mentally defend myself, because defending them to her was not going to work. She was not in a receptive frame of mind, so I wasn't going to waste my breath and do anything with her. But dealing with it on my own, I realized I can forgive, but I'm not going to forget anytime soon, because both of those are on me. Because forgiving means that I've gotten over it, and forgetting means that I trust her not to do it again. And I don't trust her not to do it again. But I am in a place where I'm over it. And I couldn't have gotten through that without the meditative quality of my projects and stitching. And most stitching is very repetitive. You know, you've got in knitting, for example, knitting and purl stitches, most patterns are incredibly repetitive. You might have a several round repeat, but once you get to know whatever your stitch pattern calls for, there comes a point where you can kind of turn your mind off to that, where you only focus as much as you need to, and then you can do other stuff with your mind. And that other stuff with your mind can be processing. And because of this meditative quality, a lot of fiber arts and stitching, as I'm going to call it, really help manage anxiety and depression. A lot of people with social anxiety, people with autism, and a few other neurodivergent qualities tend to find stitching an easy way to mitigate anxiety or depressive tendencies. Part of it is that meditation, but part of it is also kind of like a distraction. Oftentimes you'll see people in social situations who get social anxiety pulling out a project and working on it. It creates kind of a safe space for conversation, because it's so much easier to talk about my project than it is to talk about whatever problem I'm having with a person. I know that a lot of individuals who have autism spectral disorder, various types, because it doesn't work for everybody, of course. You know, social conversations are hard. There's a lot that goes on that people who aren't neurodivergent don't notice. There's a lot of things that are kind of taken for granted. Things like proper eye contact and having the proper amount of time from hearing somebody say something to the response. That can be very difficult, especially if you have what used to be called Asperger's in that kind of range and symptomology. I don't know. I don't think I'm using the right terminology, and I do apologize for that. But that becomes very difficult, not to mention discerning facial expressions, following the emotional ebb and flow of a conversation. So like, yeah, we're talking about our awesome and amazing dogs, but following not only what the words are saying, but the subtext, the facial expression, the body language, it becomes hard. And especially if you have social anxieties or conditions that make it hard to follow that, sometimes having a stitch just kind of helps smooth things over. And the meditative property helps with reducing the anxiety while you're dealing with the anxiety. Also, as a tutor, I noticed that having a stitch in hand helps with focus, especially if you're going to a lot of long, boring things. I know that in my Facebook groups, a lot of people will take their current project to long, boring meetings at work, or they'll stitch during movies, or they'll stitch during church. It helps them focus. It's kind of the similar thing that happens a lot of time in school, where people will doodle. You'll have a piece of paper and they'll doodle on it, or they'll fold their programs. It's not a distraction. It looks like a distraction for people who really need to focus and think, but it gets out a little bit of that physical energy and helps them to retain information. I'm like this too. There is a line between being distracted and actually being able to focus with this. And some people do kind of switch off. The meditative quality can switch off the listening part of the brain and go into the emotional processing part of the brain. But, most people who stitch while listening, it often doesn't happen. I noticed that with my students, a lot of students who have ADHD in particular, several forms of ADHD actually are helped when somebody is able to do something such as doodling or stitching or getting up and pacing. I had one student who wasn't managing her ADHD in any other way, had a lot of progress with me because I allowed her to stand up and have a workout, as she called it. So she'd pace while she was trying to memorize her multiplication factors. We'd process through certain processes, and if she could get up and work through it while she was moving, really helped. And a lot of students I find who are medicated, it works with a lot of the focus issues, but it doesn't always work 100%. So having a little something extra that helps, such as a stitch or doodling, helps finish off with maintaining the focus. So it is a tool. Again, it's not the make it or break it deal breaker, but it is a potential tool to help with this. And the last big one is entertainment purposes. Crafts are fun. We enjoy them. We have a usable product at the end. I made this. You can actually purchase this top, this mesh top, on my Etsy, link in the description. You have something that you can use and enjoy. You do it for fun. People will actually go to Stitch and Chat events at libraries and town centers and social places. Or, for example, during COVID, I had a crafty chat that I did. Anybody could bring any craft that they were doing. I brought my knitting. A bunch of people drew or painted or whatever it was, and we just crafted and chatted over Zoom because we couldn't be in close proximity. A lot of Facebook groups have stitch and chats, knit and chats, events that a bunch of people gather in various time zones over Zoom, and they work on their projects and just keep the chat going. A lot of people will stitch during a movie or a TV show or listening to an audiobook, and it's just kind of this unwind and relax thing to do at the end of the night that kind of shuts off your brain from all of your problems. Maybe it helps you deal with your problems, and just it's fun to do. You will start with a blank piece of fabric and you wind up with a picture, or you start with this pretty yarn and you wind up with a sweater. And it's really just fun seeing something go from one thing into something completely different. There's an entertainment factor with this that is definitely helpful. And not to mention that dopamine rush when you finish a project or you learn a very difficult skill and you succeed, that helps with mental health as well, and validation. Like I have a project that it's a cross stitch. I think I've mentioned it before. I'll put a quick picture of it here. It's a stitch. I took the picture of my dog, turned it into a cross stitch pattern, stitched it, and framed it. And my mom loves it so much that she told me I should enter it into my State Fair fiber arts competition. And I have done that. I am waiting to hear back to see if I passed the preliminaries. And just the fact that my mom loves it and she tells me every time she sees it that I did such a good job on it. Like, there's an emotional validation there that I don't get from very many things. You know, I'm one of those, I'm decently good at a bunch of little things and not super good in very many of them. And it's like, yes, I am actually good at this. I am not a waste of space. This is not the only thing that makes me feel this way, but that validation definitely helps with some of my self-esteem issues. You know, there are a lot of good things with stitching. Now, there is definitely some downsides to this. The big direct one is you can feel pain from your projects. You know, it's that standard, doing too much of a good thing causes it to no longer be a good thing. If you stitch too much, you can actually get sore. If you're not sitting in a good position, like if you're hunched over and looking down, your head is a big, like 20, 30 pound thing, and that's putting all the strain on your neck and your back and your shoulders. So sitting in bad positions can actually cause problems. Having repetitive movements without enough breaks can cause your hands and arms to become sore and tired. And if you're not taking appropriate breaks, you can actually develop repetitive stress injuries. Things like carpal tunnel, tendonitis, and tendinous elbow are some of the most common ones. And if you don't stop and allow these conditions to heal on their own, you can become bad enough to need surgery. And after surgery, you can actually spend weeks not being able to do your craft, which a lot of people find additionally stressful. There's also something that seems to happen where a person's craft is their only emotional outlet. And that's not a healthy place to be in. You need more than one coping mechanism to help with stress and depression. Stitching is a very good tool in a toolbox, but toolboxes tend to have more than one tool in them. If you only had one tool, you don't need a toolbox, right? And a hammer is wonderful, but it is not going to help you screw in a screw, right? I feel there are a lot of inappropriate jokes I could say with that metaphor. There is this self-fulfilling downward spiral cycle that I see on a lot of Facebook crafting groups, where somebody's only coping mechanism is, for example, knitting. And because they knit too much without enough breaks, they develop, for example, carpal tunnel. And it becomes bad enough that they need carpal tunnel surgery, and they are told by their doctor that after surgery, they cannot knit for 2 to 3 weeks. And now they're even more stressed going into this surgery that they need, because afterwards, how are they going to handle it when they can't do their one coping mechanism? And then they're doing it and there's this emotional downward spiral that happens because they now have no coping mechanisms. And now they're in this emotional downward spiral that just makes everything worse. I mean, it sounds simple. For many people, it's not, but having more than one way to handle stress is so important. Relying on just one, it's good for a while, but definitely try to do other stuff to deal with whatever else is going on in your life. There are also things that are related to a craft that can cause stress. A big one I've noticed is that having too many whips can cause stress. It's kind of a similar thing to having too much mess in your home makes you feel more stressed. Like, this is definitely something I feel like when my desk is just way too messy, I get kind of this claustrophobic feeling and I just don't want to go in there or deal with it. eventually I have to go in and clean it, and that process of tidying and organizing my desk feels like I'm tidying and organizing my mind and my mental space. And it's a very similar thing for a lot of people with whips. Having too many whips is itself stressful, and dealing with the whips helps reduce the stress. So just realizing where other things, other mental health issues are coming in as well. Like a lot of people like to say that they don't just have a knitting hobby, they also have a yarn buying and organizing hobby, as well as a patterns buying and organizing hobby, as well as a tools buying and organizing hobby. So realizing where your mental health is affecting things that affect your hobby in not healthy ways, like overbuying. So this is where telling my mental health story is going to really kind of explain this one. I know I don't look like it now, because, but believe it or not, I danced ballet from when I was 4 until I was 28. So about 24 years. I quit when I was 28 because I really just couldn't. They don't make tights and leotards for people who are not sticks. They're not comfortable. I did ballet, I did tap, and I did jazz. I even took at least one dance class a week in my adulthood until I was 28 when I decided to quit. And I didn't realize how much stress management dance was. It was fun and entertaining, but it was also, you get the endorphins from the exercise. And that really helped me process a lot of stressors in my life. And in 2016, I turned 29 that year. I had one job I hated, I had one job I loved, and I was a tutor. That was the job I loved. And I moved out on my own into this place that I have now. I moved in here. My husband, a few months later, moved in with me, and in October we got married. And that our relationship is actually a very good, healthy one. That is not the cause of my stress. Now, some stuff that stresses out my husband does bleed over and affect me, but that's life. So that year was actually a very good year. And I wound up quitting the job I hated. But after that, the job I loved, I was getting more and more involved with it, making more money off of it, but doing more with it. And I started noticing problems with management, specifically the owner of the franchise / the director and the assistant manager, assistant director, and some drama that happened there with that. Through 2016, 2017 was pretty good. 2018 started to get really stressful. And in 2017, I've talked about this before, I picked up crochet again after a 10 plus year hiatus. So that was good. That was an emotional outlet for stressors and things that were happening with work. And the fact that, in 2017, my husband got a new job that he wound up really not liking. So that was an additional stressor, not to mention, economy changes and everything. We were making it, but we were barely making it. There were a lot of stressors in our lives. And with not dancing, a lot of my coping mechanisms were no longer in place for a lot of my dealing with my stress. So in 2018, I was kind of acting out from a lot of my stress in a few different ways. I was getting more and more stressed about foodborne illness. I got food poisoning off of a bad plum, And I started second guessing my ability to tell when food was still good, which resulted in a lot of food waste. There's a history with me and salmonella poisoning. I've never gotten salmonella poisoning, but between being very sick, like throw up sick when I was in second grade for several weeks, and then watching several videos and cooking classes and biology about salmonella poisoning and what happens in your body when you get sick, I'm very careful about salmonella and other foodborne illnesses. And I started freaking out about chicken in particular and some other meats and everything in 2018, and not eating it. Like, cooked, fine, I'm good. It's the preparation and the fear of cross-contamination. I started freaking out more and more when I was cooking with chicken and a few other things, and worrying that my food had gone bad, or being given bad food, or buying bad food, and it was getting worse. I would get so stressed and worried about it, and I'd burst into tears. I didn't have panic attacks, but I got pretty close to panic attacks a few times. And I also noticed that I was in a bad way. I've talked about this part before with my spending. On a good day, not a bad day, but when I was having a good day, coming home from work, I'd be feeling really good about a student I had, and it'd be a lovely day outside. I'd get off at one of two exits. The first exit went to my LYS, and the other exit would lead to Joann Fabrics, Hobby Lobby, or Michael's. I'd either buy like 2 balls of expensive yarn at my LYS, or I'd go and buy a tote bag full of yarn at one of the big box stores. I couldn't afford it. I didn't have a project. I didn't need it. And I was building up debt I couldn't afford to pay off. That's the sign that my mental health, my other issues, my stress management wasn't where it needed to be, and I was acting out for my stress, basically it was a very similar thing to alcoholics or people who do drugs to kind of keep the good feelings going and ignore the bad feelings. It's not dealing with the bad feelings, it's just, it wasn't healthy for me. And it was getting worse. Now, I did wind up watching a Jada in Stitches video where she had a no-buy yarn year. And I decided, my stash wasn't quite big enough, because I was using it. It wasn't quite big enough where I could go probably a whole year without buying anything. But this is how I got my rules into place. Rule number 1 is I could only buy yarn when I needed it for a project. So I planned it out in advance. I need that yarn for this project. I could get it. Rule number 2, on good sale. So not like Joann Fabrics always has a 50% off coupon, but actual honest to goodness, like clearance sales. I could purchase yarn, not necessarily with a project in mind. And rule number 3, clearing larger expenditures with my husband first. We're not going to nitpick like I need 1 ball of yarn for a project. I could just go get it. I don't need to clear it with him. And just also to clarify even more, I put in these rules. My husband had nothing to do with them. I didn't discuss this with him or clear it with him first, but I knew that my judgment is compromised when it comes to buying yarn. So I know I needed that second opinion, so I go get that second opinion when I'm going to be spending more than, say, 15 to 20 bucks on a purchase. I clear it with him first, just because he has validated, you know what, this sounds fine. We can handle it this month. Go ahead. Or, we really can't afford that right now. Can you wait until next month? I can argue with him on it. When I say, well, this yarn is on sale now, it's not going to be on sale next month, he says, okay, we can make it work. But it's just one of those, it's a check and balance in my relationship. And the way I see it, I need 2 out of these 3 rules in order to buy yarn. It really has helped with cutting down the spending. The problem is, by cutting down the spending, which did somewhat reduce a stressor, so the financial situation wasn't getting worse because of that. It was getting worse because of other factors, because life sucks and it's hard. All of a sudden, one of the things I was doing to keep the good feelings going, I wasn't doing anymore. So I was acting out my stress more with the food-related freakouts. And in 2019, the beginning half of 2019, the assistant manager at my work quit. And a lot of the smaller issues that had been building up in 2018 kind of came to a head when my boss, the director and owner of the franchise I was working for, my boss realized how much control over her company she had let go to the assistant director, because all of a sudden she had to pick up where he'd left off, and she didn't realize how far out of the game her mind had gone. I wasn't as involved with the business at that point. I was primarily a tutor, not doing so much of the back end stuff I had been doing previously. And between all of that, my food thing, my husband suggested gently that I go into therapy. And I did. I called my husband's therapist and set up my own therapy sessions. And I know some people are like, no, wait, this is a conflict of interest. Because a therapist should only deal with one member in a family. You don't want to be dealing with this and dealing with this and getting all enmeshed in this family drama and crisscrossing and crossing boundaries. We were all on an agreement that what happened in my therapy session did not affect my husband's therapy, and what happened in my husband's therapy did not affect my therapy. There was exactly one time where there was a crossover where the stuff my husband was talking about in his therapy did get brought up in my therapy, but my therapist only did that with my husband's written permission. So everything was kept above board. Things were separate because my husband's issue and my issue had nothing to do with what was going on in our relationship. We actually have a very good, healthy relationship with good and clear communication. So that wasn't the issue. He had his own mental health issues and I had my own mental health issues, and we were both getting tools to deal with that. Now, that first round of therapy, I did not do for very long. I did it for a month or 2, and it did make it better. I got a diagnosis. I have generalized anxiety disorder. And basically, when I'm feeling stressed, I transfer my stress into whatever triggers freak me out. So I was having more freakouts regarding the foodborne illness and stuff because I was feeling stressed and not managing my stress well. I mean, based on what I've been telling you, you probably figured that out already, but it was news to me at the time. And I was not in a good place at that moment to continue with therapy. It wasn't helping me at the time. It actually made it worse because in one of our conversations, my therapist, because this happens in therapy, by the way, sometimes you're in talking something out, your therapist kind of creates a new trigger or a new issue. And that happened. The therapist was like, because I was coping with, I can't cook with raw chicken because it causes a freak out. So I was cooking with frozen cooked chicken. And then he said, well, sometimes you can wind up with cross-contamination from the factory. And now I've got a new thing. So it wasn't really helping at the time. So I stopped therapy for a while. But my therapist did make sure I knew that when I was ready to continue with therapy, he was still there and I could call him and we could start it. And I did wind up doing that later. But first, I bought the franchise I had been working for. In April, my boss had contacted me and suggested selling the franchise to me. And my husband and I thought about it. We got a loan and we decided to do it. Effective June 1st, 2019, I became the owner and director of my own tutoring franchise. And I did well. I mean, I started off with 2 tutors and 5 students for the summer, and I started building up. I wound up by the end of February 2020. I had 8 or 9 tutors. I was only tutoring 1 or 2 students myself and I had 18 students for the entire franchise. Everybody else had 1 to 2 students. And going into March, because March and April and May are the 3 best months of the year for tutoring, because everybody's trying to finish off the year and catch their kids up to end the year strong. And the money I was going to make in those 3 months, the busiest months of the year, was going to get me through the summer when it dies and the beginning of the new school year, which would build up even further. I was on an upward trajectory. I was doing so well. I was taking home a paycheck in the first 8 months. I was taking home income, not a ton of income, but I was paying off everything I needed. And I was doing good. I was building my business. And I'm sure you figured out where this is going. March 11th, 2020, and COVID and lockdown. 2 weeks to flatten the curve, which turned into a month, which turned into many months, which turned into over a year. And that's when my business became an additional stressor. I know for sure, like mid-January, I had gotten back into therapy at that point. We did consider changing my diagnosis from generalized anxiety disorder to obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, but decided that it wasn't worth the paperwork to do that, because the treatment for both, for me, was going to be the same, which was exposure therapy. So we were doing talk therapy, kind of dealing with some of the thought spirals I would get into. But the exposure therapy is, for me at least, is like cooking with something I feel stressed about, making sure I kind of have a plan and dealing with it. And not gonna lie, this works. Because of COVID, we switched from in-person therapy to over-the-phone therapy. So we never actually wound up doing the exposure therapy. We just never got around to it. But I wound up deciding to do it kind of on my own. So I cooked with ground beef, fresh ground beef I had gotten that day. Yes, there was brown in the middle, but that's because of a lack of exposure to air. I had to remind myself, not because it's gone bad. The rest of it looked good, and so I made hamburgers, and I grilled the hamburgers, and we ate the hamburgers, and they were delicious, and nobody got sick. And by doing little things like that, and starting to cook with my trigger foods again, I started getting better. I also started trying to meditate, I started trying to exercise, and doing a bunch of different things that helped improve my stress management. And yes, knitting, crochet, and all that jazz, and new crafts besides, like soap making and candle making, did wind up in it. Yes, I was one of those people during COVID to make sourdough bread and get into bread making. And I still do that. I enjoy it. I like baking and doing slow cooked food on the weekends, on days when I don't have to work. So I've got a lot of other stuff in my tool chest, not just overbuying yarn now. And slowly but surely, my mental health has improved. By 2021, I was able to stop my therapy because therapy, for me at least, is not supposed to be an ongoing forever thing. So I did get into a place where I could continue my own exposure therapy and improve. I have now, in the last year, cooked raw chicken twice, and I was fine. Highly stressed afterwards, but I managed to deal with it. So, I mean, it's one of those things that for other people, it's like, dude, it's chicken, chill out, it's fine. Everybody eats chicken. Well, vegans don't. Vegetarians don't. But anyway, you know what I mean. And I'm in a much better mental place. Another thing that really helped was actually getting some of the stressors out of my life. Like, my business never recovered. I was not in a good financial place. You know, I'd only been the owner for 8 months. Had COVID struck after I'd been at it for a few years and felt more confident, had a loyal base of tutors, having a loyal base of clients, you know, having more money saved up in the business accounts, I think I would have been able to handle COVID and lockdown a lot better. But giving up the ghost, paying off my business debt, I was not very badly in debt, but it was bad enough. That was a relief. I do now work as a tutor for the franchisor company, headquarters of the company I own my franchise from. And so that first month, where instead of all the money I made going straight back into paying for stuff and losing all that money, and instead actually receiving my bi-weekly paychecks. I mean, I only made a few $100s that month, but making money instead of losing money for the first time in years, because I closed down my business in December 2022. Oh my gosh, the relief, how much that was able to help our finances and pay off debts, because, you know, my husband and I have old cars that require more expensive maintenance and they break down a little bit more, and we had a few multi-day power outages, and we got a dog and she's more expensive. And having that dog, I love our puppy. We got her, she was a year old in December 2022. And I just love her. She is amazing. She gets me out doing walks more often. We play outside in the sun, which helps my body produce more vitamin D. I'm more physically active. She is so sweet. She gives me cuddles. She loves to play. She's a smart ass and so funny. Like, I love having my dog. I've always wanted a dog that was mine, and she loves me and my husband the best. I'm okay being tied if I'm one of the people she loves the best. That's another tool in my toolbox, is to have this dog that I love. And I'm happy to report that I'm in a much better place. I still have anxiety. It will never go away. But I was never in a position where I needed medication. Would have been fine if I did, but that's just my course. And I've got it managed now. I'm doing better every time I deal with something that stresses me out. I have enough tools in my tool chest. And yeah, knitting and crochet, Tunisian crochet, my YouTube channels, physical activity. My husband and I went dancing last night. We did ballroom dancing for the first time in years. That's how we first met. That's something we've connected over. We did it last night, and although I am sore, I feel so good. And we've been taking West Coast swing dance classes. That really has helped both of our moods a lot. And it's something that we share, and it's been strengthening our relationship even more. And I'm in a good place now. And yes, fiber arts have helped with that. And fiber arts helped identify that there was another problem underneath the surface that I needed to deal with. And by dealing with that problem and having developed this tool chest that included my fiber arts, I am now continuing to be better, the better version of myself, and feeling good for the first time in years. So I hope that this has helped some of you. Like, share, subscribe. My mental health is not affected by it, but it's nice to see those numbers grow up, and maybe somebody hearing this story will find help and comfort in it. And I hope that this helped you, at the very least entertained you. And happy crafting. Bye.